Hello, I'm Philip Stowers. I live in East Walnut Hills. I was born and raised in Covington, Kentucky, and have lived in Cincinnati or East in Ohio since 1991. I identify as gay. My pronouns are he, him, his. Born and raised. After college, came here back for a year. Then I moved to Louisville I was there from 87 through 91. 1991, I moved to Dayton, and then actually I moved back to Cincinnati in 2001. So I've always been connected to Cincinnati. I didn't move too far away, but lived in those different places. I went to a school called Center College in Danville, Kentucky. It's a small liberal arts school ran by the Presbyterian Church. I intentionally didn't want to go to a Catholic school, having been a product of Catholic education. So I went to a Presbyterian school where the largest single religion was Roman Catholics. I was economics major. For undergraduate, I went to Antioch University, the McGregor School, for a master's degree. Yes. So I went there later. Couldn't be two opposite schools if you try, in their philosophy. I have a master's degree in management from Antioch. I lived all over downtown Dayton. I lived in the Oregon District, and I moved to Grafton Hill. Then I lived in McPherson Town, back in Grafton Hill, back in McPherson Town. And then I bought a house and I lived in Wright Dunbar Village, which was my favorite place I've ever lived. And moving back here, I'm sad I had to sell the place and moving back here, so yeah. But the funny thing is, my friends were always here, so I was never really, in my family, I was never really kind of disconnected from Cincinnati. I had a lot of friends in Louisville. And when I lived in Dayton, heck, I was here as much as I was in Dayton, back and forth a lot. I felt like early on, you were kind of insular. And when you're more closeted, you're not kind of out and open. And you're probably more closeted because of the way that the community perceived it. And it wasn't welcoming. It wasn't, it didn't feel good. You were always in fear of your employment, kind of before you came out, what your friends and family would say. So that was always there. And that was the general atmosphere, with, was it Article, I always get it wrong, Article 3, issue, whatever, then they repealed it. I always get those mixed up. But that was still here. And then Cincinnati had that national reputation, what happened with the police brutality and the boycotts and all of those things were kind of a black eye on the reputation of Cincinnati. So it was not a good time to be out, but it was a good time because I think a lot of the community kind of rallied around. I think before that year that I was, I graduated in 86. So like that from 86, from the summer of 86 all the way through the following summer of 87 when I moved to Louisville, I was in Cincinnati and kind of working here actively and kind of looking for my first professional job. So I still had a lot of contacts and friends here. So you're in the mix here, and you get a feel for how the city's going at that time. So yes.
When did you openly identify as gay, or why did you choose not to?
I think a lot of it was family. I think it's coming out in stages. I always tell people you're always coming out. Every job, then you have to kind of come out. It's an announcement. I think coming out to myself was, in my 20s, maybe early 20s, when I finally, got through I always say I was very fortunate having been raised Catholic. Some people say they have. I never heard a fire and brimstone kind of anti-gay speech from a pulpit in the church. So that kind of helped me, in my growth, where some people have. And that helped me. So I think, it was, you don't want to be that way because society is perpetuating the negative stereotypes of gay people, and then you're a black man, so you kind of add that on top. So, whenever people say it was a choice, I'm like, why would I choose this? Why would I choose this? And then the reality came, this is who I am, let's make the best of the way you were born and who you are. And so that was, in my early 20s, it was, okay, I'm comfortable with who I am and having relationships with men, and then it's professional, and then, it's friends, family, professional. A lot of times most people come out to their friends before they come out to their family, or they have friends. It's, your friend group, mostly gay men, then your maybe some of your straight friends that you come out to, then your family. And it's kind of funny because I tell an interesting story. I never did really come out to my family. I have an older brother who's gay, and he came out to my sister when they were, talking about a particular issue. He was kind of helping her through some things, and he came out to her. And my sister, in grand Stowers fashion, said, "Well, I guess I don't have to ask about Phil then." So that's been a family joke, So, but then it was loving and supporting, and they've come a long way. Like my older sister, two of my older sisters who have recently passed in the past 5 years have died, and both of them actually have daughters who were gay, and so that, I think, us help them deal with that situation, and then they become more open. And my sister was asking, I was teaching her about pronouns and the difference between cis and het. She wanted to know kind of what that was, so I was kind of teaching her like cisgenders, you're as you were born, and the difference between sexuality, sex, and attraction. All those things that kind of gave her a lesson, so it kind of felt good before she died. She was able to kind of understand that and see where her daughter was coming from. So that's one of the things that was really pleasing and happy that we had those discussions. And then, like, I had professionally, I had a boss whose son was gay, and he was very supportive during my whole kind of coming out period. Or coming out professionally period. He was very helpful. So that's how it is. And then other companies I've worked for now, larger companies, have had active diversity initiatives, even though, I say strange with companies, they can be as diverse as you want to be, but it all depends on your manager, how they can have a big effect on how you are. So you always kind of have to gauge that as an LGBTQIA person is receptive. And so community, definitely. I mean, I was raised in the east side of Covington, which was primarily a small but tight-knit African-American community. And of course, you know the same people, and then you hear the kind of same slurs and everything. But not just that they were a Black community, you're going to hear that anywhere. But you were kind of raised around the same group of people, so it was really hard to kind of navigate that. So you hear those things, and you kind of don't want to be what is associated with slurs, and so you fight that stigma. So yeah, that's always in the back of your mind, like I don't want to be there, and then you start to internalize some of the homophobia. You can internalize it, and it can manifest itself in several different ways. So my brother is almost 3 years older than me.
Did he get any backlash for his identity?
Whew, if you knew my brother, he wasn't going to take it. He's kind of a firebrand. He was who he was when he was, and has always been a strong person. So he was able to stand up for himself in a lot of cases, just kind of fight his own battles, and it probably was best that he was the first one. So yeah.
Yeah. Did you see anything that you wanted to do or not do that he did when he came out, or?
Not really. He eventually went into the military when it wasn't safe to go into the military. Yes, and so it helped him a lot to kind of so he called it get his life together, he may say, but going away to the military, seeing a different part of the world really affected his kind of his upbringing, his outgoing nature, and having traveled the world helped him a lot, and probably aided in his comfort with himself. So, and he would say that the funny thing is during that time, it was supposed to be no gays in the military, but the military's always had gay people and always will have gay people, and they're fooling themselves so they don't think that they do. So.
So when you got back here in 2001, do you feel like the sentiment towards queer people had changed at all in that time?
Um,
That was a tumultuous time in Cincinnati.
yes,
Period.
it was. It was like I moved back here. So I really had no plans on coming back to Cincinnati. When I got done with graduate school, I was going to go to the coast or to Atlanta or somewhere. And my mother started to get sick. And then as I was coming back and forth, I really got to spend a lot of time with my nieces and nephews and my family. And I wanted to be here, in my mother's formative, in her latter years and to make sure she was comfortable. And she had a major surgery. It's a long story. She was having a major surgery in St. E's as I was driving back and forth to Dayton. I still lived in Dayton. I was actually working in Cincinnati by then, but commuting from Dayton to Cincinnati. And I came back driving through Cincinnati to go to her hospital while she was having surgery at St. E's during that weekend of the riots when the city was on lockdown. So that's what I was coming back through. I was driving from Dayton and I drove through Cincinnati early in the evening, because her surgery was later. So I drove, it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I drove through Cincinnati. And then on the way home, it was dark, because I think it was and it was starting to get warm. I don't know if it was April, May, whenever that. But I was driving back through Cincinnati, and I can see Covington was all lit up and kind of still going as normal. Then when you cross the bridge and you kind of looked to either side of Cincinnati, it was just no traffic, a car or two here, but no traffic. It was the weirdest thing. And then shortly after that, I had finally sold my house in Dayton and I moved back here to Cincinnati. So that was in 2001 during all of those issues. It was 2001, wasn't it? I think, yeah, that was, because it was when I moved back here, so.
Ooh. Yeah, that was a crazy time, I'm sure.
It really was, and it was, I think they were really starting to, I think a lot of the bigger companies were starting their diversity and issues, and I guess I have friends that worked at P&G. I know they were a big force in that, as well as some of the, Kroger and other companies who knew, who saw and knew that this younger generation didn't want to come to a place that wasn't seen as diverse and accepting. And if Cincinnati wanted to stay and compete, it had to be seen as diverse and accepting. And it's like we're, in some aspects, we're making some changes, and a lot of them are surface and cosmetic at first, and we really need to get to do the work. But it seems like everything we're doing to make progress is kind of being stunted by the state now. It's just craziness. I worked for it was a manufacturing company that did, when I got back here, they did braiding for, it's just all this technical kind of stuff for a lot of manufacturers and defense industry, and a lot of a company my sister worked for. I worked there for a while, and then I worked at the University of Cincinnati. I kind of went back into the nonprofit field, is what I had done before. And then I ended up going to Macy's and working for Macy's after that. So I liked, I think the corporate world has given me a skill set, and the nonprofit world has got that need. I need to kind of make sure the world is fair and that we continue to improve. And so that's part of the volunteer work I'm doing, is to make sure that we continue to progress as a community, as individuals. And so I guess that's kind of what I liked the most, was doing that sort of work. But I have to say, the corporate world has given me some of the skills and the tools, and to, be able to kind of bring that, because there's I think when I started in the world of nonprofits, there was the big push for accountability was coming into the nonprofit world that we hadn't had before. And it's good and bad to that. You can't always measure the good that you do for an organization, but it definitely, there's definitely positives to it, negatives to it, as far as that accountability being held, and that's helped, to be able to understand, hey, there's some measures that maybe we need to look at that we hadn't before, and that was just starting to come into the nonprofit world as I was working. So,
when you moved back here during that time, what part of town did you live in?
I lived in Paddock Hills at the time. Yeah, I lived there.
That's like just by Norwood, kind of?
Yeah, so Norwood, between Norwood and Avondale.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where were you hanging out? Where were you going?
At that time, it was, that's very interesting because I'm trying to think what was, Simon Says was a big place for the African American community. I think actually 1470 might have still been open. We called it the circuit when we were here in Cincinnati, even when I lived in Dayton. Like usually on Friday night, you might have been at Carl's Place, which was downtown, which was a primarily African American owned gay bar in Cincinnati. You might go to Carl's on Friday, and then eventually it was the ballpark, and that was another story in of itself. The ballpark was a mainly black crowd on Friday. Saturday night, you could go to Dayton, 1470, and see Cincinnati up at 1470 because everybody, a lot of times would pile in the car and drive up to Dayton and have friends up there. A lot of times I'd have friends that would stay over, when they couldn't drive home or, would want to camp out and drive home. And then Sunday, a lot of people would go to the Eagle in Columbus on Sunday, so you could see the same group of people, around. I was like, I could only go to the Eagle when I took a half day on a Monday, maybe somebody's birthday or some reason, like I can't get up and function on a Monday, partying till 2 a.m. and then driving back to Dayton. So, yeah. I'd take a half day sometimes, or take a day off, a Monday off, and go up there. If it was somebody's birthday or some reason we had. Yeah, right, exactly. I was 36, maybe 35, 36. It was on Walnut. Between 4th and 5th. And then Carl's was over on, what's that place? Privilege. It's now a parking lot, but Carl's was in the building next to Privilege. The building's been torn down and it's now a parking lot. And the ballpark was on, was that Vine, maybe? It wasn't too far from the downtown library. I can't remember that. I can remember now it's like an office, so it was there. And a lot of people, some people go to the dock on Sundays. If they didn't go to Columbus, they would go to the dock on Sundays. Later on, the dock had more hip hop music. They played more hip hop music. There was a lot of that's where it kind of the racism played out because no bar wanted to have a black crowd or be seen as too black a crowd. And that was always an underbelly here in Cincinnati. I can remember one night we were at the ballpark and there was a DJ named John Boston who played just amazing house music. He played great house music and so he would play on Fridays and it got to be a very black crowd. He always had a very black crowd. He played at the dock sometimes and he had a very black following. And so he would play at the ballpark and the crowd was very black. And then one night, John wasn't there and they were playing country music or something. And that was like a definite, we know what you're trying to do here. And that I don't think the bar didn't last much longer after that. Yeah. And I mean, and it was one night a week. It's like one night a week. A black crowd hangs out there pretty much every other night. That could have been, in bigger cities now, you'll see that where different bars have different flavors on different nights and that hadn't caught on in Cincinnati yet. So that was kind of the story of the ballpark. And 1470 was always 1470. You'll go somewhere, I'll be in Minneapolis at a conference or, on East Coast or somewhere, and someone will say, I'll mention I'm from Cincinnati, I'm from Dayton, and it'll come up, and they're like, "Oh my God, I had the best time in Dayton. What was the name of that bar? 2379 or 1060 or something?" I was like, 1470 West. Yeah. 1470 was a gay bar. Yeah, it was the biggest gay. It was one of the biggest gay bars in the country. Before, I think prior to this, I've heard a little bit of the history, and I don't know how much of it is true. Is that originally he had opened a disco. The guy owner had opened a disco, and it was like, we always joke because it was in an old Winn-Dixie or something. And, you know, like, oh, you go back and meet somebody in produce or so. So it was a huge space because prior to this, gay bars had been so kind of dark and secluded. And this was right in a shopping plaza, right on the main road. And so a lot of people went there and had a good, especially out of bigger cities. This is the first time a gay bar, probably one of the few times that a gay bar was kind of out and open, at least in my beginnings. You know, when I was in Louisville, the bars were downtown. It kind of tucked away in a less traveled part of downtown, so you could kind of go in and go out unnoticed. But 1470 was sort of that way because it was kind of set back, but it was on it was on Dorothy Lane. It was a main drag in Dayton, so yeah. I think I was able to navigate white spaces easier than a lot of people, having gone to white schools all my life. So I was kind of easier to navigate, and I might have been seen as one of the good ones, you know, and I knew like one of my friends worked at the bar at Doc, and so I was always able to kind of go in and, you know, it was always welcome. But there were always undertones in the gay community that people weren't welcome in certain places. And I just had a friend who recently is Hispanic and was telling a story. They were in a bar in Cincinnati, and this hasn't been, you know, they would come back and forth. They live on the West Coast, and they would come back and forth. That he sat next to a bar, and the guy said, I don't want you sitting there. And he thought maybe somebody else was sitting there. And he said his friend didn't want to sit next to my friend who was Latino. And I'm like, I'm so glad I wasn't there, because I would have, would not have been a good situation. But so there's still this undertone, and there's still this, you know, sometimes feelings of not welcome. But a lot of times I will go into a space and you know, have the confidence to navigate a space just because I'm used to it. And and I don't even know how to say it. I'm not looking for it, but maybe I just look beyond it, and that could be it. But it's there. And there's no doubt that it's there. And it's just when you've kind of dealt with it all your life, sometimes you just kind of, you look past it, or you just kind of can go on and do what you're going to do and have a good time. So, yeah.
And this
yeah, this is you know, since I've been back here in the 2000s, and there's still just a current, you know, in some places of that here. So
today,
it's getting better, but still, like, you can tell that certain bars cater to a certain crowd, and that's who they're. You know, that's their public, so that's what they want to do. But someone else comes in that space, they should do their best to make them feel welcome. It's really funny. On Thursday nights, we go to the Black Brotherhood, which is a group of African American men. Most of us aren't bears, but it's kind of the social group that we kind of formed on top of. We have a Black Gay Book Club, and then Cincinnati Black Pride. We'll go to the Somerset on Thursdays and kind of have a social hour where people can kind of get out and meet each other and talk and kind of form friendships and relationships. So we'll do that. I go, you know, sometimes you go to the main event where sometimes we joke, yeah, because it's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting crowd. But it's that younger African American crowd that need to see people who are my age who have made it to the other side, and to know there's a life after, there's a life when you're in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. We can't just be hiding away. As much as I don't go out nearly as much as I used to. It is important to appear sometimes, to show them that there's a life on the other side, and try to do things and be in spaces. We're doing Cincinnati Black Pride is doing a lot we're trying to have a year-round calendar, because we know as an African-American group, the needs for our community are greater and deeper. And so we're trying to do more, have a year-round calendar. We're working with the Queer Soup. We're actually putting on a fitness symposium, and there's talks with a local bank to possibly do financial wellness. And so just having these throughout the year on top of our Pride Festival, because if we can talk about the ills of the community all we want, but if we're not doing anything to kind of move that forward, it's all for naught. So yeah, we of course Tim M, when he came back to Cincinnati, there had been a previous group of a couple here, Doug Spencer Cooper and his husband Greg, had a Eyes Wide Open festival, which was our de facto Cincinnati Gay Pride event. It was a music festival. It was a movie film festival, and then it was we had social events, and then at the end of the night we had, they would have a big picnic, and they did it a couple years, and it was just a lot of work. And then they ended up moving to New York, and I just saw a friend of mine, he's looking down here, so he was they ended up moving to New York, and so when Tim moved here, he had been involved and saw other cities had Pride, and got the group together, and it's let's pick this up and run with it. And out of that became Cincinnati Black Pride, and it was always, having known him before, it was always, wanted to step in. I was involved first couple of years, and then I changed departments in my company, and I was working weird hours, and so one year I kind of stepped back. Well, then that changed, and I kind of moved. I was always kind of on the periphery, and attending all events, and trying to contribute where I can. But then recently, when we kind of formed established board, in the last 3 years have been pretty active. And this is year 6. So with the first 2 years, third year I was just mainly kind of aiding and volunteering, and then the 4th, 5th, and 6th I've been around and been active on the board. So Eyes Wide Open Festival.
Remember how long that lasted?
3 years. It lasted 2 or 3 years, and I don't remember the years. I could probably look it up, but I don't remember the years. But it was a film festival, and they had some art, spoken word artists, performers, some singers, and it was just a whole kind of arts, music, literature sort of thing. And it was really cool, but it was just very involved. And, Doug and Greg put a lot of their own personal resources into that. And, so.
Where did that take place?
It was at the Aronoff. It was in the black box part, I guess in the back of the Aronoff. Not really the black back part of the Aronoff. There's a theater back there. So, yeah. What is this, 2000? Maybe 18 is when Black Pride started, because this is the 6th year. Yeah, so 5 years, and this is the 6th year. It is Juneteenth. We normally did, we were doing it the same as Pride, because we wanted it to be we were not diverging from our Cincinnati's Pride, we were doing it the same week and congruent. And then it got to be a lot of, some of the events were overlapping, so it was harder to do. So then when Juneteenth became a holiday, we're like, oh, this is natural. Let's try to end. So this year we'll be ending on Juneteenth, and will be one of our last celebrations, and then we'll be ending before Cincinnati Pride, so that we can all participate in Pride. Because it's a big deal for us to walk in Pride and be seen, out here in the Pride streets. And we're also making a very conscious effort to be active and be in spaces and be seen. So that is, and a lot of, and I have I have several nieces that are lesbians, and I know their friends, and I run into my niece out a lot. I'll see her out a lot, but she has her own group of friends, and we'll hang out, and it's not a bad thing, because maybe your interests are different, or you're like, if you're out and you're single, you're trying to meet other women, not other men. So it's kind of natural that those things form, but it shouldn't be exclusionary. You should be comfortable anywhere that you go. And making a conscious effort to even within my family try to be more conscious of making connections in that community. And everybody refers to me as Uncle Phil, and it's a long story. Part of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Well, my nephew is also gay, and he's involved in several other groups, and so when we'd be out, he would say Uncle Phil, so everybody started calling me Uncle Phil because of that whole phrase. It's just how I became Uncle Phil. That's sort of the story. But there is a division. Some of it is natural, and some of it should. But what should not be natural is people should be comfortable anywhere that they go. I've had gay couple of friends who most of their social circle were lesbian women, and they were gay male couple. And almost all of their social circle were lesbian women. And I met a lot of lesbian women through that circle. I haven't lost touch with some of them, but still, that was how it was here in Cincinnati. There's a powerful circle of professional Black lesbian women in the city that maybe isn't known or seen, but they're there. They're there. Yeah. It could just be so boring to be around the same people, all the same people, do the same things, not learning or growing in any way. That's just really boring to me. I've always liked different types of people because I always feel like I learned something. Could be positive, could be negative, but I'm learning something from anybody that I meet. So that's the way I've always felt about it.
Oh, guys.
Right. Right. And then you read about all, like they were talking about the number of lesbian bars that were in the country. Like they used to be maybe like 300, now they're like 15. Yeah. I mean, and part of it is that, these internet apps, this happened to gay bars too, that the apps don't force you to actively come out. You can still delay coming out and going out and meeting people. A lot of times when you're gay, before there were apps, which I don't know anything about, you would be, finally you'd have to build up the courage to go out into a gay space. And now you don't have to do that. You can do that from the comfort of your living room or whatever. So I was in high school. Yeah, I was in college by then. Yeah. So.
What year was your first Cincinnati Pride?
I'm trying to think. It was, I'll tell you how far I go back. I think it was when it was in Northside.
This started about 2000.
Yeah, it was in Northside, and that was, because I've been to a Pride in Louisville when I lived in Louisville, and then Dayton sort of didn't. I think it was earlier because when I was in Louisville had Pride, and so they would have a Pride fair out on the edge of the city at the water park, and I was kind of involved and there, going to that Pride. But then when I moved to Dayton, Dayton did have a Pride. It was on Courthouse Square. It was smaller, but Cincinnati's I would come back, and it had to have been before. I moved back here in 2001, so it had to have been before that, whether it was in Northside. For some reason, I remember the parade coming down Hamilton from Clifton, and I remember that. But I think it might have been somewhere else even briefly before that. But that's where, those are the earliest ones I remember. I remember going to the festival in Hoffner Park in Northside, so that's been a while. We marched, so there's a documentary called Tongues Untied by Marlon Riggs that was really a very formative part of my upbringing because it showed me Black gay men, he did this documentary during the height of the AIDS epidemic, like standing up and really fighting back. And they marched in a parade. It showed a group of black gay men marching. It might have been New York or San Francisco Pride. And I was like, I want to do that in Cincinnati. I want to march in a parade with a group of black gay men, standing up and saying that we're here. We don't want to be forgotten. We don't want to just, be, in the shadows and dying unnecessarily at a greater rate. We're here. And I got that opportunity the first year Cincinnati Black Pride, which was, I guess, in 18 maybe. Well, yeah. But I used to march prior to that when I worked for Macy's. I would march even before that, because that was I remember the Bergfeld decision and how that had come out on Thursday and our Pride was Saturday. And it was electric. The whole feel of it was like, it was this magic that kind of came, because the timing couldn't have been better, and that he was from Cincinnati, that just everything just couldn't have been better, couldn't have fallen out at a better time. And it was just magical. And I guess, at the time I thought I want to enjoy it while I can, because I kind of knew that, people would talk about, what's going to happen if we get marriage equality, what are all these civil rights groups? I'm talking about, well, the NAACP is still here, still fighting battles. So, that it's not going to go away. There are always going to be people who are going to be opposed to your humanity, your civil rights. So, I knew that there was going to be a backlash. I just didn't anticipate it as strongly as it is now. They know that they've lost the cultural war, because younger people just don't have the same attitudes. Younger people who have realized that a lot of the, society has been rigged against them, their futures. And so they're not buying into a lot of the things that previously had kept them kind of in that camp. So they have to do what they can to maintain power. The powers that be have to do what they can to maintain powers, and they're distracting people with, these anti-LGBTQ laws. Is not having drag queens going to put another dollar in your pocket? It's going to put a plate on your child's table, banning drag. What has it done for you? Absolutely nothing. So I swear, I remember that day. I said I was sitting there thinking of the weather was perfect. How Pride is usually very hot. The weather was perfect that day. There was a slight breeze. The whole Pride parade, it was like the Lord himself came down, whatever you believe, the universe, God came down and said, this is right, this is fine, because it was a perfect day, and I just remember enjoying it, but I remember this is not the end. This is not the end all be all. Just the Macy's ERG, at the time, our employee resource group. And as like things happen, I got more involved in the community and started to, I had always been on boards when I lived in Dayton. It was part of my job. I worked for a foundation in Dayton. Part of it was sort of like a little community outreach, that the foundation is being seen out in the community. And so I was on 4 or 5 different boards then at various times. And that was part of my job, was to do that. Well, then sort of pulled back from that when I came here, started to do a little volunteer work, and then eventually kind of worked into the board positions I'm on. So.
What boards do you sit on?
Equitas, which is LGBTQIA healthcare, Cincinnati Black Pride, the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. I work with GLSEN. I do volunteer work with GLSEN, and then Power Projects, which is an art, professional arts and research. It's just an art organization in Northside, and that's another one of my passions is art. So that's, that is kind of separate, but I bring informed, all of this other work that I do kind of informs that work too. But it's a great organization. And just adding a lot to the community. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I've been doing that. I was on their development committee for a long time, then I came on the board as a volunteer. So more organic. It's now very corporate. We know that. And that has its good and its bad because people should be able to say, go to work and bring them whole selves to work. But it should be an opportunity for a company to sell us products, to market to us because we're a new audience. We're a new, probably affluent audience. A lot of times they think, or people, a lot of times we used to be double income, no kids. Now, a lot of the gay couples I know have kids, either biologically or have adopted. So our families are formed. Are born, however they're happening. We're still having families too, but I just don't want us to look like a marketing opportunity. So I want some teeth behind all these efforts. And we see now, what happened in Florida with Disney when they try to stand up. Look at the backlash they got. But as somebody said, Disney will be there long after the governor's gone. So. Yeah, I mean, when you're trying to run for president, right? Yeah, and people are still going. People are still going. But it's and the thing is, like, I don't even believe. I was talking nuances. You say nuanced things. You always have to be very careful. Like, I don't believe that these people really believe anything that they're saying. I think that they know that they can motivate other people to do their bidding or to protect the status quo by inciting people's fear of the unknown, or people that they don't know or that they think they don't know because they do know them because they're in their family, So.
I think George Santos is a phenomenal example of that, who will literally say things against his own interest because it motivates his party.
Exactly.
Right.
It's and that they will, but it shows you they will say and do anything for power. It's proven they will say and do anything for power, and that's what happened. Yeah, it is. It really is, and it's. I always say, there's no one's really interested in root cause analysis. Like, hey, why is this happening? It's always it could be a political spectrum from the left and the right. But like, we have to look at the same set of facts and circumstances and find out how we can solve it as opposed to making it a political agenda. In so much of the great, I would say this, America's biggest, I guess, our biggest downfall, of course, is race and chattel slavery. And I think it's still informing. I think it's haunting us, and we've never dealt with it. And I think it continues to haunt people because it's been a convenient wedge. Like I said, what does banning, critical race theory, what has it done? Has it put any food on your table? Has it gotten your child any other? It hasn't done anything but just put a wedge issue. So yeah, that's just the way I've seen it now, is that we're never going to be able to advance until we actually deal with those issues. And the original sin, the great original sin is racism. And it is a convenient, way to other people. And the more we other people, the less we're going to be able to participate. And the country's going to be brown. The country's getting brown. The country's going to be brown. And they keep on saying, they keep on pushing that they say sooner than later. I think it probably already is majority brown. And nobody wants to say it. You talk about when I hear when they talk about the election was stolen, what I hear is that a lot of Black women in Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta came out and voted, and they're not supposed to be able to change elections, and they did. And they stayed home for Hillary Clinton. They weren't motivated, but they had been pushed to the edge, and they were motivated this time. And they came out and they voted in numbers. Not strongly African-American women, but a fair number of African-American men came out too, But as Joe Scarborough says, Black women have saved this country multiple times from, saved it from itself. So we'll see. We'll see if we're going to be able to save ourselves from ourselves. That should tell you when you can't. What was the old joke? If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And that's what I feel like. They've decided that they can't win on ideas. Yeah. The right can't win on ideas. And I'm not saying that I'm pragmatic, and especially my undergraduate degree is in economics, so I always kind of, sometimes I wish I'd majored in, I don't know, English or something where I didn't know, when I read something, just when you read something and you can kind of understand it because that's what you've been trained in. I'm not by any means an economist, but from an economic perspective, I can read this. I was talking to my older sister, who's my half sister, and she's very religious. She wasn't raised Catholic like my parents' kids were, but she was talking. Something was happening on the news. I happened to be watching the news with her. This was years ago, and she said, I don't know, something, and it was in a religious context. I was like, no, sissy. I said, whenever you look at the news story, find out who's making money. Think about who's making money, and that's how to look at it, because somebody's always making money off something. And that's what I feel like everything has been reduced to, who's going to make money off something instead of trying to solve social ills. But I read a lot, and I'm getting close to my time. I read a lot, and like my to-be-read shelf is, and I can never get to it because then I check out more books from the library. Because I'll read something that'll reference another book, and I'll reckon that. I'll say somebody should just give me like 18 months to read all my books and pay me to read all my books and then let me go back to work. There should be a grant somewhere. I should be able to give me 18 months to sit home and read all my books, and then I'll be refreshed and I'll go back to work. Just pay for everything while I do. So that's the way I just try to constantly stay informed and be able to talk about. And so sometimes I get so much knowledge that when I'm trying to farm an argument, it just I have too much information into. But sometimes I need to sit down and this is A, B, C, D. When people talk about Chicago, about all the violence in Chicago, they want to kind of blame it. They try to make it culture, like Black people are so violent. Do you understand how Chicago got segregated, one of the most segregated cities in the country, in the North, not in the South, and how people were kind of cattled into substandard housing where they were probably exposed to all the kind of environmental detriments to their well-being, just all of those things. And wealth was extracted from them through housing policy, just all of those things one by one. And then you end up with this broken community, and then you wonder how. But people want to step back and say they didn't have any kind of word in it. And I say this all to say that pays out exactly, and it's exacerbated when you add in the aspect of being an LGBTQIA person. So all of those things I've talked about as far as race relations are exacerbated by the fact that then you throw in sexuality, sexual orientation into it.
How do you feel like life for LGBTQ people, or specifically Black LGBTQ people, could be improved in Cincinnati? Where do we have to go from here?
Access to resources, access to education. I mean, that is the Black community in general, but it's exacerbated by that space, access to to resources, to we're healthcare, all of those things that are plaguing our community worse. Of course, to be able to kind of just live and exist as you are. That would help. That would help. A lot of times, a lot of our social ills are exacerbated by I was reading an article about the stress, like stress levels. They think that has a lot to do with a lot of the comorbidities for African Americans, is that they're living constantly under stress. And then you add in being gay on top of that. So it's a constant, it's like it's like you have a needle in you or something poking you, and eventually you get used to it, to that pain or that sensation. And then you turn or something, you make a move, and it moves, and it just reminds you. That's what I like to attribute. It reminds you. I see that as racism, and then racism on top of sexual orientation is it's like something that's sticking, that's poking you, or something that eventually you get used to kind of the pain or the discomfort, and then you may make a move, and all of a sudden it jars and it's there again. That's how I like to compare it to. So hopefully we'll be able to exist as we are and be able to pull that object or whatever out of and just exist as a community.
Approach.
I had a very good friend, Daryl Pierre Benjamin, who's a local actor. He talked about rest, like we really have to learn how to rest. And he did that rest series, and that's been kind of in my mind, is really kind of learning how to rest. And all this volunteer work I'm doing, there was a couple weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks in a row, I had a meeting almost, like out of the 15 nights, I had 14 meetings. And I just took a step back and looked at it. Then on top of, there's been a lot of changes in my job, and just all these kind of things, all this kind of added pressure. And you just sometimes just have to take a deep breath and de-stress. And, look at every situation you're in and make the next right move, and the next right move, and the next right move, until you are able to cope and thrive, not just survive, thrive. And I'll end on this. One of the most profound things I ever heard. I saw Ibram X. Kendi spoke at the Freedom Center, and someone asked him, what would African Americans need to do to finally thrive in this country? And he named 3 things, economics, reparations, those things. But he said the main thing that will make African Americans thrive is, and let me get this quote right, African Americans will be able to thrive when they're able to experience joy that's not rooted in triumph over struggle. And that's it. Black gay people will be able to thrive when we're able to be rooted in triumph over struggle that's not rooted in our either race or our sexual orientation. That was one of those life-changing things that you hear, and that was it for me.